much has been said in conservative circles about the fact that the science is a cult. And that is not an assertion I disagree with. It seems to be that all of this perfectly represents a cult. But I wanted to talk a bit more specifically about it, because you kind of get the broad strokes. You understand that many of these, the points that many of these people are making, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, the Robert Barnes, whoever it might be who's making the point today, but they never get into anything particular. And there are a few developments that happened over the past week or so that I think I can accurately explain to show precisely why a lot of this attitude is a cult. And it starts with the new masking policy from the CDC. You see, the CDC has inverted their perception of many things in science, science in air quotes, of course, with regard to this particular masking policy. Now, they are saying now that vaccinated people don't have to wear the mask. No, not even if they're infected by the COVID-19 virus do they have to do that. They can simply walk around indoors all they want. And of course, the explanation for this from Dr. Fauci, after getting some pushback from some media personnel, is, well, even if you have the virus, asymptomatically, if you don't have any symptoms, probably not going to spread it to anyone. Which is accurate. It's actually accurate to how respiratory diseases work, and how, of course, COVID-19 works, being a respiratory disease. And the funny thing is that many people said, well, yes, but that's only for the vaccinated people. If you have not gotten the vaccine, but are asymptomatically spreading the disease, you don't have any symptoms, you aren't actually sick, you could still spread it. But it's only the vaccine. Of course, that doesn't make any sense if you understand how vaccines work and how respiratory viruses work. Because when you take a vaccine and you get an immunity boost from that vaccine, it does not fundamentally change the virus. If you don't have symptoms, you're not going to spread it, regardless of whether you have the vaccine. The fact of the matter is that respiratory diseases spread through symptoms. The majority of the spread from a virus like COVID-19 is going to come from coughs. It's going to come from runny noses. It's going to come from that sort of stuff. It's not going to come from simple breathing. It's not going to happen. That doesn't happen all too often. Yes, it could happen, but that's not common. It's really, really not. And people don't understand this. And clearly these people don't, or do, and are simply lying to people about it. And of course, Fauci is making this distinction as well. But this is one of the clearest examples of just how much of a cult the science is. And to explain that in full, we need to explain the differences between the science, which you might as well replace with credentialism, and science, the process, the thing that actually we should be doing. Because you see, science, the process, is you get a question, you do background research, you create a hypothesis, you do an experiment, you do some data analysis, you do a conclusion. Boom. That's the scientific process in a nutshell. It can get a bit more complex, but that's the general idea. Credentialism is a completely different thing, because you see, credentialism relies, of course, on credentials. It requires the CDC, an organization which is centralized and can only be the sole arbiter of what the science is. All of these sorts of things are going on in the CDC. Everything is dictated. Rather than being a simple way to explore the world, it is a dictate to the world. That is what credentialism is, as opposed to the science, or actual science, the process of science. And once you understand that distinction, it becomes strikingly clear that people who continue to advocate the idea that vaccines are somehow this magical thing that changes fundamentally how COVID-19 works as a disease are simply following those credentials. Because you see, Fauci didn't even really make the argument that vaccinated people are fundamentally different from non-vaccinated people. He simply said that if you are asymptomatic, you're not going to have it. And he said with the vaccine. But he didn't say that without the vaccine and you were asymptomatic, that you wouldn't, that somehow it would be different. because of course that would be directly lying, and these people are very good at not directly lying, but lying between their teeth, frankly. And that is what they do all the time. And it's similar to cults because to believe in credentialism above everything else, you have to believe that whoever holds the credentials is somehow a better human than other people. That they are able to take all of their assumptions and extrapolate real data into fake data, and then that fake data will be 100% accurate, as I've explained many times when I've explained the modeling phenomena, which of course has been going on for decades, not just this year. This last year was just the most exemplar example of it. It is the most obvious version of it. Similar with media. These things didn't really change, they just became more obvious. And modeling is one of the clearest examples of such. So much of government policy has been pushed through modeling, and one of our second point, and that being pretending that somehow public policy isn't politics. You see, Fauci still gets by pretending as though his position isn't at all political, and he's not a political person, all while being a public official. It's quite funny, because Fauci will say in one breath, well, I'm a public health official, and then in the next breath say, well, my job's not political, I'm not going to get into these things. Well, guess what? Public and political are essentially the same word. Yes, they have different connotations, and depending on your usage, political may be more accurate, or public may be more accurate, but for the purposes of most things, saying that you are a public official and a politician, or someone who acts as a political person, is not different. Because it turns out that public and politics have the same root, that being polis, of course, meaning city in Greek. And this goes back to one of the many things I've been saying over the past few weeks or a few months. That being that language is a very, very important thing. Once you understand that people like Fauci, who pretend all day to not be political at all, are in fact public health officials and thus necessarily political, it starts becoming ever clearer why they spend all of their time trying to justify public policy through things like scientific studies. Of course, referring to, in that case, modeling, where Fauci will take the modeling done at the beginning of a pandemic to pretend as though that is somehow evidence for asymptomatic spread, which is how he got past the lie that asymptomatic spread was ever a thing. He was only able to do that because our culture had accepted for such a long time the credentialism and the idea that these people were not political and didn't have any motives for pushing public policy, despite, of course, being public health officials and, of course, pushing policy on a daily basis. That's all Fauci does. He goes on TV, he pushes public policy. He's a politician. He's political. That's the truth. And once you understand that, once you get all through all of this muck and nonsense, these people start failing. Really, understanding their tricks, understanding their language, understanding what they do to trick you into believing certain things is 90% of the battle. The rest of it is just pointing it out. And that is as easy as simply writing down a sentence. There is so many people who you can see write out paragraph after paragraph of explanations and justifications for whatever particular policy or argumentation line they're going down. And all of that will simply amount to a single sentence. And best thing you could do in that situation, if you're trying to argue with these people or trying to humiliate them, as may be the case, depending on where you are. If you're on Twitter, do the latter. All you need to do is break down all of that gunk, all of that muck, and bring it to its base state. Because once you do that, you just get to watch them squirm and pretend as though they were saying anything more than what they were actually saying. And it's quite fun, and I suggest you do it. So, gonna leave you off here today again with one thing. Understand your language. Once you do, as I've stated before, you will be able to compete against these people. Once you have complete control over what you say, over how you use your language, over how you use every bit of what you do, and understand their tricks, then suddenly it becomes much easier to debate and argue and compete with these people. And to most importantly in this particular case, to break down this paranoid schizophrenia that is completely surrounding people who still obsess over masks and the COVID paranoia and all that sort of stuff. So, that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do in fact subscribe down below wherever you are and in other places. Say, breakingonthedaily.locals.com. Hey, I want to get more people in there. I want to see people post and all that sort of stuff. I want to make that a burgeoning community. And I'm planning on actually putting some extra stuff on there as well. Along with on many alt-text sites. I have BitChute down in the description, Brighteon, Odyssey, and all that sort of stuff. And some extra stuff will probably end up going there in the very near future. I have some ideas. Oh, it's going to be fun. On top of that, if you want to see where I'll put some of my thoughts on occasion, you can look at my Gab, my Minds, and my Parler. Particularly Minds, that's why it's on the screen at all times. And, well, that's all. I'm going to leave you guys there. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm KelKidman. Man, it has been tough not doing this for a week. And I'm out.